Howdy, guys. Howdy. We're going to get started here in just a second, so I can get this camera to get this lighting fixed a little bit. Let's see. Yeah, that's all right. There we go. Well, well, it works better. All right, about 10 seconds we'll get started. I see there's about 45 people on here. We're going to talk about moral cowardice today. So get your bootstraps on. There we go. Trying to get this, every day I get a little different angle with this periscope. Can't quite seem to get along with me. But listen, I want to talk about an interesting conversation I had with a friend earlier today about this situation up in Oregon. And some of you might have gone onto Facebook and seen the article that I posted where Sheriff Clark did a podcast or did a radio show where he offered a principled or rational defense of the Oregon protest. Highly recommend you go there. You can go to freecapitalist.com. It's the feature story there. And I was talking with a friend, and a friend of mine said, well, I just disagree. You know, I think law enforcement acted to disarm people they knew that were armed. Hold on a second. Brad says that the sound dropped out again. Let's see here. Kimball, you're my guy. You got to tell me if you can hear me all right. It may be just the federal. Kimball, you tell me if I got sound here. All right, very good. So here's the conversation. So a friend of mine says, well, you know, I'm on the side of law enforcement here. They knew these people were armed. They were breaking the law. They pulled them over and gave them a chance to stop. And when I see these conversations happening online, the conversation immediately goes to an interesting question, which is, well, what did LaVoy do wrong? And then there's this endless debate about what he may or may not have done that's wrong. Even the defenders who say that the police overreacted and murdered LaVoy, count me in that camp, even the majority of the defenders start off by kind of defending, well, he didn't do anything wrong here, here's why. He didn't do anything wrong, here's why. And Jewel and I were talking about this, and it's just a horrible situation with the cause of liberty right now that we've been so trained, taught, and educated that to live as servants that we don't think like free men and women, and we don't think like we're in a free society. And let me show you that. Because, you know, as soon as you shift the conversation onto LaVoy's behavior, and as soon as you shift the conversation onto whether he did anything wrong, you find yourself beginning with an interesting presumption. And that presumption is that the police are right if LaVoy did anything wrong, anything at all, right? And there's an immorality in that situation that I want to address here. Matter of fact, I would argue, hold on a second, I've got to go take care of the Liberty Reef watchdog. Hang tight. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on. You know, in this day and age with, you know, law enforcement, people putting media personalities and alternative radio personalities in prison for associating with protesters, and your watchdog goes off out here in Liberty Reef, you got to pay attention. So, you know, we pay attention. Anyway, going back to this situation, Jewel says to me, well, why is the scrutiny so heavily on LaVoy, but there's so little scrutiny being applied to the Oregon State Police and the FBI? And even in the freedom movement, we're arguing about whether LaVoy reached for his gun. And most of us have no idea whether or not LaVoy had a gun in his inside coat pocket. I mean, if the FBI is telling the truth, he had a 9mm pistol for whatever reason in his coat pocket. And we can argue until the cows come home about what we think and about what we believe, but that won't change the facts. Some things are true whether we believe them or not. He either did not have a gun, and he was reaching for some other reason, either because of a wound or a gunshot or whatever, or he did have a gun. But that presupposes a whole separate situation where it presupposes that if he reached for a gun, then it was okay. Right? We already are so far down the road that we've abandoned free society and we've abandoned liberty for this argument that, yeah, if he did something wrong and got shot, it's okay. And I want to show you how that's actually moral cowardice. I want to show you how if you begin in this conversation by defending the government or by defending the state or by defending police officers, you are actually engaging in an act of moral cowardice. An unprincipled act of moral cowardice. Now, that's not to say you have to begin with the presumption that the police are bad or that the government is bad. Remember, I got to be careful because people nowadays make a man offender for a word. Hear me all the way through. If you're going to get pissed off about what I'm saying, or if you show this to your sister and she gets pissed off about what I'm saying, invite her to listen to the whole thing so you understand exactly what my argument is. You see, America is a unique country. And we live in a place where we separate the civil government from our religious government. And most of the people in the United States of America come from a background, what we usually call the Judeo-Christian background, but I could broaden it out and just say a Western civilization background, where most citizens admit that before God, we're all inadequate, that we all have weaknesses and shortcomings, that part of humanity is our frailties, and we sin, right? Most Christians would acknowledge that you begin kind of your ultimate Christian humility with the position of, well, we're all sinners. The problem is when you translate that into your civics, you get tyranny. And when you allow civic leaders and government leaders to prey upon that instinct in you and that conviction in your private life, you misunderstand the fundamental nature of America, our government, and civics in a free society. Because in our free society, in our government, we do not begin with the presumption that all men are guilty. We cannot. That's not freedom. If you begin with the presumption that all men are guilty and the job of the government is to go find and punish wrongdoers, then you have to have increasing omniscience for the government. You have to get rid of the Fourth Amendment. You have to get rid of the Fifth Amendment. You have to get rid of the First and Second Amendments. You have to get rid of the Constitution because to really go out and get the bad guys, ultimately you have to get all of us. Right? If you're, and I want to say Christian, but if you're a rational thinker, even a student of Aristotle, you're going to admit the frailties of mortal life. And so, if the purpose of government is to go prosecute wrongdoers and kind of make hierarchies and say, well, we're going to target these guys first, and then if we can scoop up a few down here that are doing these things, and a few down here that are doing these things, ultimately what you're doing is you're empowering the government, this is socialism, by the way, trying to empower government with the resources it needs to make everything good. That's not America. Free society begins with the exact opposite presumption. And you've heard this phrase, but you don't think about it very much and you don't know what it means. Free society begins with the presumption that men are innocent. Okay, leaving your worship and your relationship with deity aside, in a free society civically, if men are their own masters first, we believe in this concept called self-government. Go read the Declaration of Independence. If we have rights, okay, that originate before government, and that government is really instituted to protect us, okay, then you develop a morality of courage. And the morality of courage says, I have the courage to face the world, and I have the courage to begin with the preposition that men are innocent. Not innocent before God, but innocent before law. In other words, when we establish government, government has to give to every citizen, to every person that comes within its purview, the presumption of innocence. And so we begin every interaction with our government on equal footing. All citizens are equal. All citizens are presumed innocent of a crime, of a violation of the law, until the government has proven otherwise. Now, the reason you have to do that, my friends, is because the government is delegated the use of force to enforce our laws and to protect each of us as we have deemed appropriate through our Constitution and statutes, okay, and through our state constitutions and statutes. So what happens is, when there's a conflict or a crisis, we can't presume that whoever is involved in the conflict is guilty of something, or else what we do is we presume that the government is the arbitrator of righteousness. Let me give you an example in this situation with LaVoy Finicum. There's a guy on Periscope and online that I like. He's kind of a friend of mine. He's getting rather popular these days, but he's kind of brain off, and he's engaging in moral cowardice. He says, well, Rick, LaVoy's not innocent. I said, what do you mean? I'm sure he's a sinner. So am I. No, he says, but they were breaking the law. I said, what the hell are you talking about? What do you mean it was breaking the law? Says who? Says who? We don't, in a free society, we don't skip the whole due process of exercising our civil liberties and jump straight to the conclusion that he's guilty and let's see if the courts can prove it. Civically, we must start with the proposition that we remain, in the beginning point, presumptive that he has not broken any law. If he's doing a wrong, see, most people can't understand this. Most people can't understand that when you perceive a wrong, that doesn't necessarily mean a law has been broken. And just because you don't perceive a wrong doesn't mean a law has or hasn't been broken. You're going to have to think on that one, okay? Because we don't have time to get into all that. But let me just go a little further with this moral courage or moral cowardice situation. Ammon and LaVoy exercised their discretion and their choice, and they led a movement of people to do some things. Some people agreed with them, some people didn't agree with them. And they had certain purposes. The job of the executive branch of our government is when there's a complaint and there's a probable, rational basis to believe that complaint that the law may have been broken, the executive's job is to go bring that person to justice. That doesn't mean to guilt. It means to a process where we're going to treat them fairly, no matter how heinous the crime they're accused of, because they are presumed innocent. See, most of you don't believe this. I mean, it's just this thing in your head. It's a word that you don't use and you don't think about, unless, of course, you were to be accused of wrongdoing. But if it has to have any meaning whatsoever, a morally courageous person must begin the analysis of this situation by saying, wait a minute. He is presumed innocent, and the only thing the law enforcement is empowered to do under the laws of a free society is to bring him into a process where his innocence or guilt will be determined, his guilt under the law, not his innocence or guilt before God. His innocence or guilt under the law will be determined by the processes we've outlined in our republic. Our national republic, or our state republic, or our county republics. That's why your courts are called district courts. And sadly, most of the freedom people don't understand the law. I know that sounds like an insult. Most of you have been trained, taught, and educated with bad ideas about our courts, and our courts are not gone. Matter of fact, we're going to talk about that in just a second, but I want to stay with this moral cowardice and moral courage argument for a minute. It takes moral courage to say, no matter how wrong the actions appear, before we punish someone, we are going to submit them to our judicial system, and we're going to adjudicate through a fair and deliberative process whether they're guilty or not guilty of violating very specific laws. Not whether they're a good person or a bad person, not whether they agree with us or disagree with us. You guys, it's like the Twilight Zone around here these days. The internet going on and off, TVs going on and off, phones going on and off. Here's the point. When you begin by saying, well, he did wrong, and the police, the law enforcement officers, I love that term, which means it's such a broad term. The FBI or the Oregon State Police or whoever it is, they acted justly. See, here's the problem. You're welcome to have an opinion on that. But you must, if you're a civic and moral person, you must begin your inquiry by presuming that he hadn't broken the law. You must. And you have to hold the government. It's the government that's on trial, if you will. It's the government that has the burden to prove that they have acted, they killed him, right? This isn't like they, arrested him and brought him to court. Then he would be on trial, right? We can't ever put LaVoy on trial. Okay? And those of you who say, yeah, it's because of his own actions, you're moral cowards. Because you don't want to think through this process, and you actually don't believe in our system. You say you believe in law enforcement. You say you respect cops, like your brother-in-law who's a cop, or maybe you're a retired police officer. But you're deceiving yourself. Because if you love the Constitution of the United States, if you love the idea that we're a republic, you can't begin with moral cowardice and say, well, I think the cops were right. That's a conclusion, not a presumption. If you begin with that presumption, you're a coward. If you're a police officer and begin with this presumption, you're unfit for duty. Because as soon as the police officer shoots someone dead, the first inquiry of a free society is, holy crap, what happened? Number one, what happened? And did the government exceed its bounds? Because we judged LaVoy. We exercised the force of law against LaVoy and against Ammon and everybody else who's now in jail, by the way. We exercised the force of law against them before they'd been adjudicated to have broken any law. Matter of fact, the ones who are sitting in prison now have lost their liberty temporarily. And even those who are being released, they have to give up their passports, they have to give up their firearms, so they're losing their right of free association, their right of free travel, their freedom to bear arms. Okay? The government stopped protecting those things and insisting that if you want out, we're going to take those away. So the machinery of government is going to work here. And as a free person, as a person who loves liberty, as a person who wants to see a better society, a better America, a better world, a better government, you've got to have the moral courage to begin with the presumption that these people are innocent until proven guilty. And the way we prove them guilty is not to accuse them and slander them and libel them in the media or in the press. The way we prove them guilty is through a process of law. And see, sadly, most people in America, including those in the freedom movement, you've opted out of the most important piece of our government. And you've done it mostly subconsciously. And sadly, this is one of my criticisms, friendly, of my brother Ammon here. He said in a couple of videos, you've heard him say, well, you can't find justice in the courts. The courts aren't there to give you justice. God is there to give you justice. The thing you're looking for in courts is to advocate. And then a jury of your peers gets to decide if, after you've been given a chance to advocate, and after the government's been given a chance to advocate, whether to use the force of government against you. You can't get justice from court. You can't get love from court. You can't get any of these things from government. The purpose of the court is for you to have a forum and for the government to have a forum where you're supposed to be equal. Now, you're not. Because the citizens of this country have abdicated their oversight of the courts and their participation in the courts to a society of lawyers and private judicial guilds, it is very difficult to exercise that advocacy in a courtroom, particularly if you don't have money. But let me transition now to the next step here. Everybody wants to know, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? Well, first of all, keep tuning in. But the second thing you can do is you can get real serious and sober on whether you have moral courage or moral cowardice. The first thing you can do is work on developing the moral courage to begin when you hear an act of wrongdoing or see an act of wrongdoing or believe you've experienced an act of wrongdoing, to begin in your civic mind to presume their innocence. Now, there's an asterisk there because in the middle of controversy and heated situations, for example, in the middle of LaVoy's ordeal on the side of the road, he didn't have any obligation to presume anything. He had an obligation to try to defend his life. People don't want to talk about that either. His life is sacred, no matter how guilty morally or otherwise he was. And he had a moral duty to try to protect and defend his life and the life of those in that truck. Okay, he didn't initiate that circumstance. The government did. And the government has no right to summarily execute people. Now, you may say, well, that's not what I think happened. Fine. But before you reach that conclusion, too, you've got to begin with the presumption of innocence, and you've got to get from the presumption of innocence all the way through the basic procedures of due process to a conclusion. And we live in a society where we don't like that. The average person doesn't understand it, and the average person hasn't even tried to understand it. That's why when you get a speeding ticket, you just pay it. When you get a parking ticket, you just pay it. You get a fine, you just pay it. You complain. Your kid gets, sent to juvenile court, and you go in and beg for mercy. You get arrested, sadly, you get arrested and accused of a felony, and you start abandoning your convictions immediately and your principles immediately, because it's scary. It's moral cowardice. And we've all got a little bit of it in us. And we need to burn it out through developing strong convictions. And you develop strong convictions by understanding principles. Principles. Now, that takes courage. To stand on principles takes courage. And Ammon and LaVoy and those who stood with them out at the refuge, I love how Sheriff Clark talks about their courage. Because at some point, tyranny is real. And you may disagree with them and their strategy, but you must do so if you're a civic-minded person and a moral person, from a position of moral courage as well. And that means we all, when we encounter government, we all begin with the presumption of innocence. Now, next step, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? I don't know if you saw the news lately about the hearing today. So last week, these protesters, for lack of a better term, were arrested, the ones that weren't killed, and they were held without bail. And they had a bail hearing, or a detention. It's called a pretrial detention hearing. And Shauna Cox was given conditions and released. The others were not. And most of you don't understand how the court system works. That hearing was before what's called a federal magistrate judge. A federal magistrate judge, just so you understand, they're not a constitutional judge. You can read the Constitution, you won't find a federal magistrate in there. They're just an employee of the court system. They're like the secretary for the judge. I know they wear robes and we're supposed to say Your Honor, and they're just hired employees and they do ministerial tasks. And what they do is they hear things first, and they're given a broad swath of authority to act for their boss, if you will, but their boss are the Article 3 judges, the constitutional judges. And so what happened is the magistrate involved listened and conducted the hearing and whatnot. And again, I'm not disrespecting the magistrates, I'm just telling you what they are. The magistrate judge denied them the ability to remain free pending their trial. Very, very unfortunate thing, because most of us need to be free to help in our defense. Most of us need to be free to continue to provide for our families. Again, remember, we're presumed innocent. So for the government to impose upon us and deprive us of our liberty and our livelihood is a punishment before a conviction. And so the law presumes that people are innocent and therefore presumes that you must let them go under certain conditions. And there's a statute, a federal statute related to this that Congress has passed, and there's law related to this. And it does presume that you can let these people go, that you must let them go, unless they're a threat to themselves or to the public, or if they're a flight risk, meaning they're not going to come back to court. And the government has the burden to prove that. And there's different standards of proof, and I won't give you the whole law lesson here. But so what happened is, Ammon, I'm not sure why more didn't do it. I think it's because they don't have attorneys and they don't know what they're doing by themselves. I know they've been appointed. I've read the docket. I know some of them have CJA appointed attorneys and some of them have public defenders, and Ammon has retained an attorney. But here's what happened. Ammon and Pete Santilli and the O'Shaughnessy guy, they objected. And they said, hey, respectfully, we disagree with the magistrate. And so they asked, in layman's terms, for an appeal. But they basically asked for a rehearing of the matter before the actual district court judge, the federal district court judge, the Article 3 judge. Okay? If you don't know what I mean by Article 3 judge, just go get your copy of the Constitution and just go read Article 3. And what they said is, we want a chance to go for another hearing before the Article 3 judge. And the reason you do that is because Article 3 judges are subject to reversal by the appeals courts. Article 3 judges generally are higher skilled and are better informed, usually. And they usually take the matters more seriously. And because now that matters elevated to them, they see, maybe there's a problem here. And what they did, and what Ammon and Pete Santilli and O'Shaughnessy fellow, I'm sorry if I'm saying that name wrong, I just don't know him, I can't remember his name. He actually got released today, so I'm going to leave him out of the conversation. But Pete Santilli and Ammon Bundy had a hearing scheduled for today to basically be heard in front of the district court judge. And remember, again, they're presumed to be innocent. And I've been concerned, to be honest with you, about making sure these men and women get good legal counsel. Because in the freedom movement, we just do such a horrible job of defending ourselves in courts and advocating in courts. The Hammonds, in this case, they have a track record of being taken advantage of in the court system because they weren't helped and they didn't know how to advocate effectively in court. And so the machine just trampled all over them. And that's what I'm afraid of in most situations, particularly in this situation. So they've got to have good legal counsel. And I saw, the government had filed its motion. I've been checking the docket. Most of you don't know how to check the federal docket. I mean, this is basic citizenship 101 here, guys. And I checked the docket and I saw the motion that the government had filed. And I thought, that's not very substantive. They don't have a very good argument here to hold these people. Much different argument for why to hold Ammon than to hold Pete. But Ammon's attorneys didn't even file an opposing memorandum. And I thought, well, no wonder they lost. And they didn't even advocate. They just showed up and talked. And, the attorneys gave a press conference. And I know I'm digging them a little bit here, but I mean, maybe they have some weird strategy that I don't know about. But, showing up and talking isn't a good substitute for actual advocacy under the rules. And Pete Santilli's attorney did something much different. Well, at first he didn't, but then Pete Santilli's attorney, either yesterday or over the weekend, filed a 52-page or 51-page legal brief saying, get my guy out of here. He is presumed innocent. He needs to be free. He needs to go with his partner back to his home and get back to his life and get back on the radio and get back to sharing messages and doing the things that he does because he's not guilty. He's presumed innocent. And the magistrate judge had said that the reason she denied his release was because of a suspicion of mental illness, which had not been proven, and there's been no prior determination of mental illness or anything like that. I guess she just thinks that if you're willing to defend Ammon Bundy, you're mentally ill, and because of comments he made in videos during his Pete Santilli show, in encouraging people to come to Burns and to the refuge. And so I read this memo. I was impressed. I thought, holy cow, how did Pete get so lucky to get a CJA attorney who's going to write a 50-page memo? And then I noticed something. And I posted this also on the Free Capitalist page, my page, Rick Kerber Free Capitalist, and also on the Free Capitalist group on Facebook. They got some help. Because a liberty-minded person in the, I was going to say in the vein of our Patriot founders, but I don't know if that's true. But a liberty-minded person from the Rutherford Institute wrote a legal argument for them and sent it to him. Didn't charge him anything. Just a freedom-minded person who's interested in advocating for our rights said, hey, Mr. Attorney who's helping Pete Santilli, it'd be a good idea if you made these arguments. And I was like, man, that is an example of something I've been saying, and I'm going to say here at the end of this broadcast that freedom people need to wake up and turn their brain on about because they're missing opportunities all day long to make this world better and to stand up for freedom and to help restore this country. And then what happened is, so Ammon's attorney gets to court today, and right at the court hearing, he said they file a motion, but we want to do over. Wait a minute, we're not ready to argue today. We need some more time. We're going to go get some evidence. It's like somebody sent him back to law school and said, by the way, do you know the government has a burden to prove by clear and convincing evidence each of the elements necessary to establish that Ammon would be a flight risk or that Ammon would be a danger to himself or to the public? Oh, really? Okay, we have some more time. We want to go back and do some work. And I don't know if it was directly related to what Pete Santilli and his attorneys did, and this memo, this friendly memo from the Rutherford Institute. I don't know if it's because of that, but it looked like, basically, it was like, wow, look what they did. We want to do that too. Well, why am I telling you this? My friends, if you're going to stand up for liberty, you have got to learn how to advocate. We spend so much time in the liberty movement talking about the laws that we want passed or don't want passed, and talking about the executives that we like and we don't like. We don't know how to defend ourselves in court. We've abdicated that right. But let me tell you something. One person can't do jack in the legislature. You can't. One person cannot pass a law. One person cannot object to a law. Well, the governor of the state where you're at, maybe in some states. But other than that, one person can't do anything. In the executive, one person can't influence the executive unless you're Soros or Gates or Buffett, right? And even then, you have to pay a lot of money, and who knows what you're going to get. It's like a slot machine. One person in those branches of government doesn't have standing. But still, in the open courts, both the federal and state courts guaranteed to by the Constitution, the federal Constitution guarantees the state courts will function as a republic, right? Which means we have open access to them. Because we have open access to the courts, one person, every person can walk into a courtroom and advocate for themselves. Now, you have to be an attorney to advocate for somebody else. And you may have criticisms galore of our legal system. And you may have a lack of faith in our legal system. I hear you. I don't know how many of you have been through more legal challenges than I have. You know, you want to look at my history a little bit? I think my bona fides are sufficient in that category. I know the uphill battle. But here's my point, my friends. There was a one-person freedom lover who wrote a legal argument and emailed it to Santilli's attorney, who then was able to incorporate it into a legal brief and file it with the court, and he changed the world. I mean, he didn't cause a revolution, but in this world, he's probably going to be responsible for getting Pete Santilli out of jail. And he wrote a great press release and a great article about how it's really, really bad to allow the government to get away with jailing Pete Santilli and even charging Pete Santilli because he was associated with this protest. In other words, the New York Times and CNN and ABC News journalists don't have any more credibility under the law or any more rights under the law than a sole individual person also seeking information and reporting information. And no matter whether you agree with them or their viewpoint, in this country, there are principles upon which we base our government. And if you don't know how to advocate for those principles, you're doing nothing but spouting hot air, and your keyboard warrioring isn't doing anybody any good. And I'm going to give you an example. There are more people on this call right now, or on this Periscope right now, who know the name of Sheriff Ward in Harney County, Oregon, than who know the name of their own county sheriff. There are more people on this Periscope right now who know the name of Judge Gratzky up in Oregon, however you say his name, than know any of their county commissioners. And yet you're willing to bleed for freedom and liberty. You're willing to stand up for liberty and freedom. Let me give you another example. I posted an article on freecapitalist.com. Some people think it's funny. Or not on freecapitalist.com, on the Facebook Free Capitalist group, where at this university in California, a reporter goes around doing kind of the Jimmy Kimmel man on the street or the Jay Leno man on the street, asking these college young men and young women, who are degree-seeking students in a fairly well-known, prestigious university, simple questions like, who won the Civil War? Who's our vice president? And they didn't know. Dozens of people had no idea. But you ask them questions about pop culture and they know them just like that. And this is not new. You've seen this. And see, here's what happens. We lie to ourselves in the freedom movement. We say, well, that's not my kid. I know we pretend like we're better. It's bull. That's bull. These young people are not stupid. They're uninformed, but they're not stupid. They're going to go get the jobs and work in the bureaucracies, though, that oppress people and that murder people like LaVoy Finicum. Because you could probably go and survey those same law enforcement officers who shot him dead with basic civics questions, and they couldn't answer them either. Why? Why? And we're so quick to say, oh, Common Core, oh, government education, and socialism and collectivism. Bull. Liars. You're either lying to yourself or you've been lied to. That's not why. That's not why. Because there are socialists who could answer those questions. I saw a friend of mine posted on Facebook, all is lost. I mean, if these young people who are voting for Bernie Sanders, can't answer these questions, well, it's the young people voting for all of them. It's all of us. I mean, just because you know the answers, you're not any better. Here's why. Well, I mean, you're better off because you know the answers. But in general, for the cause of liberty, you're missing the point. How is it possible that these young people are pursuing a college education? A lot of them probably getting student loans. A lot of them, their parents are probably spending a lot of money. How is it that they're pursuing a professional degree and they don't know who won the Civil War? You mean, one gal says, you mean the one back in the 1960s? Right? And it's absurd. But why? Let's get real with why. If you believe in liberty, you believe in freedom, and you believe in the free market, and you believe in the marketplace of ideas. And here's the answer. The reason they don't know the answer is they don't need to know the answer. The reason they don't know the answer is because it is absolutely irrelevant to their life. Now, you want to argue and say, well, it is relevant. It's relevant to you. But it's not relevant to their life. It's not relevant to the job they want. It's not relevant to the degree they want. It's not relevant to the girl they want to date. It's not relevant to where they're going to lunch today. It's not relevant to them because they have been born into a society that is not free. And so it's a waste of brain energy to know that stuff for them because they're not currently engaged in the liberty fight. They don't even know there is a liberty fight. And if they did, they think we're all a bunch of nut jobs. And capitalism tells you, you get what you incentivize. And you fail where you neglect. And the solution isn't to go mandate that the schools teach about Jefferson. And the solution isn't a seminar series to educate these young people on the Founding Fathers. Because it's still not going to be relevant. Because they're still in a society that is not free, that's increasingly tyrannical. And it doesn't matter to them. That's why we fail in the liberty movement so much when we start our conversations with, well, Thomas Jefferson said, well, here's a quote from Alexander Hamilton. Well, here's what John Adams said about a virtuous and moral people. Here's what George Washington said. And no offense. I mean, I watched a video today of Ammon teaching this basic civics 101, and I was like, this is great for people who already love liberty. But this isn't going to reach your average millennial. They don't give a crap. They wonder why white guys... right? Because they think it's only white, because it's not. But they wonder why these conservative, libertarian, Republicans, or whatever, always talk about the Founding Fathers like there's something, oh, yeah, great history. They don't get it. And the more we start, every constitutional group, every patriot group, you're already converted. So you see these quotes from the founders, and it's like, it's the nectar of, sweet nectar of liberty. I love that quote. Those men were so inspired. They were so awesome. Yeah, because you already see. But the reason we're losing in the liberty movement is because we're only talking to people who see. And because we're only talking to people who see, we debate amongst ourselves incessantly about, well, no, I think that the, Constitution means this, and I think the Second Amendment means this, and well, I think we need to have a militia, and I think we need to have a legislative agenda, and I think we need to have study groups, and I think we're just talking to each other while the ship sinks. And we're not talking to the people who have no idea why it's even relevant. They have no idea that the fight is even on. And so they are moral cowards, but don't know it. Because they're not taught moral courage. They're not taught that life is worth more than their job and the gratification. They're not taught that some things are worth dying for. They hear it. They see it. They see LaVoy's Finicum dead, and they think, dummy. They don't understand, and it's not relevant to them, so they don't hear us. They disengage from us. And they watch the news, and they begin with the presumption of guilt. And they say, well, he shouldn't have done that. And sadly, many of you, even though you have tuned in to the cause of liberty, are suffering from the same problem. You don't know principles. And you lack moral courage. And you don't know what to do. And I'll give you my final example. A gal who goes by the name online of Shiloh Ryder sent out a link today on Facebook with the list of the individuals in Harney County in Oregon who have political power and their phone numbers. And she sent an invitation and said, call these people and tell them you want a full investigation. Tell them we demand accountability. Tell them what you want. And here's my question for you. How many of you got on the phone today or yesterday and called any of them? 30-second phone call. How many of you called your own sheriff and said, hey, I'd like to meet you. How can we do that? How many of you have just decided, I want to know who my sheriff is? How many of you have ever called your congressman or your senator and said, hey, when's the next time you're going to be in town? I'd like to meet you. By the way, I want you to go to Washington, D.C. and demand some accountability for this kind of government overreach going on in Oregon. See, when you have moral courage, you're not afraid to pick up the phone. That's just the beginning. That's not even the beginning of the beginning. It's like the preface to the beginning. You've got to be willing to act. So, my friends, do you have the courage to act? Do you have the courage to stand up for freedom? It's important. It's important. Truth matters. Freedom matters, and I know you know that. I know you don't need me to tell you that. But I'm rattling your cage a little bit because we've got to do more. We've got to elevate our game. We've got to lift up our game. That's just the preface. I'm going to be putting out some information today and tomorrow, building on these concepts. And tomorrow night, I'll be back on here, 10 o'clock. And we'll keep this conversation going. Because there is a lot to do. And the current events of today give us a lot of opportunities to look in the mirror and ask ourselves where we really stand. And for what we really stand. So, the last thing I want to say is, just like those children, those young people on college campuses who didn't know the answer to basic questions like, who won the Civil War? Most people in the freedom movement don't have any understanding of why the BLM battle. I'm looking at a question here. It doesn't make sense to me. Sorry, guys, that are sending questions. It doesn't make sense to me. Here's my point to you. You don't understand what to do to restore liberty. Let me give you. Sorry, I'm getting a little distracted by some of the questions. Some people say, Rick, we need to restore the Constitution. I've heard that my whole life. No, we do not. The Constitution is still the Constitution. We might need to repair it. We may even need to amend it. It's still there. We have to uphold it. Because in upholding it, we can restore our nation. And how do you do that? How do you respond to the tyranny in Oregon? How do you respond in a way that makes a difference? I mean, there are people up there protesting in Burns right now, right? And some of us could do basic things like get on the phone and call, right? But then where do we go from there? Because what we've been doing hasn't been working. I'm not going to answer your question tonight, but I promise you, I've got some things to say about where we go from here and how we get there. But there's a lot of people who are going to hear this message. And it's baby steps, my friends, one step at a time. We'll take them as rapidly and as quickly as we can. Here's my challenge to you. You think you love liberty? Good. Go online. Go to the Free Capitalist group on Facebook and read the post that I've mentioned here. Read the posts about Sheriff Clark and listen to his audio. And watch the video of these young people. And then ask yourself the question, what can I do? And then come back here tomorrow night and let's keep this conversation going. Take care. Warm regards.